Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to bringing you top-tier insights and strategies from established experts who have achieved remarkable success in their fields and in the writing industry. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Jeroen Kraaijenbrink, a renowned strategy educator, speaker, consultant, and author of the groundbreaking book, The 1 Hour Strategy. Jeroen brings over 2 decades of experience spanning academia, business consulting, and thought leadership, and his book challenges conventional wisdom about strategic planning by proposing a revolutionary approach that makes strategy accessible to everyone in organizations, not just executives. And today we're going to be talking about how he brings his expertise into the writing world and how you can implement these ideas to become an expert in your own domain as well. So without further ado, welcome to our podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the wonderful introduction. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. We're excited to learn a bunch about your strategies and insights. So I'd like to start off today by just getting to know a little bit more about you. My first question is, based on your extensive background, what brought you to write your first book? What kind of led you to inspiration for this piece?
Dissatisfaction with what I was teaching. So my first career was in academia. I was a professor doing research and teaching. So I was teaching strategy to students. And after having done that quite a couple of times with some of the traditional textbooks, I wondered, how useful is it what I'm doing? How does this apply in the real world? If I imagined, because I was still a young professor, if I imagined how it was in business, I could not imagine how this was useful. So that's how it started, being dissatisfied with how I was teaching and how others were teaching strategy. And then I went on the look for other books, better books that I did find useful. And even though there are tens of thousands of books on strategy, I could not find a single book that I really liked. So I decided to write my own. My first book, The Strategy Handbook, how that book started.
Yeah, well, that's always an amazing, way for it to come about, is kind of finding that need that needs to be filled and then filling it with your own expertise and your own knowledge. And clearly you're able to do that because now you have this incredible book out there that has helped so many different people. And, I'm just curious, before writing this, you had many other books. So I'm curious to know, how has your insights and strategies evolved over these times, from one book to the next? There's probably been a bunch of overlap, but also development from one book to the next until you finally became to the 1 hour strategy.
Oh, yes, there is. As I mentioned, I was initially teaching the traditional approach that was written down by others. And I think we're talking now 10 years ago, 2015, I wrote my first book, The Strategy Handbook, which is, let's say, one mediumly radical turn, because what I promote there is already a much more participative approach, a more hands-on approach, a more practical approach, quite for those who are familiar with that, the whole series of books on the business model canvas, the value proposition canvas, it's a more practical approach to strategy than the traditional approach. So that's what my first book became, okay, how can I make it really practical? The assumption was still there's a company, the company needs a strategy, they need a process, they need some tools, and with a group of people, they develop strategy. So on one side, it is still a bit traditional. On the other side, it's already quite a different approach because it's very qualitative, very participative, much more a short cycle approach compared to the very long cycle approach that we know traditionally. And now fast forward to the most recent book, The 1 Hour Strategy. It's, I think, an even more radical take on strategy, where I think over time, I've more and more discovered that one of the problems with strategy is that it's this kind of old process outside everything else. People treat it as something special, as something out of ordinary business, while we actually should make this a core competency of an organization, if not the core competency. So that's what the 1 hour strategy kind of lays out, is this idea of how can we make strategy core to the entire organization. So we move from the traditional kind of linear to the strategy handbook, which was more an iterative short cycle approach, to the 1 hour strategy, which is much more like a whole organization approach to strategy.
Understood. Okay, so throughout all these transitions and growth, I guess you could say, in these strategies, I did notice, when I was flipping through the book, you mentioned that the strategy could be ordinary, even mundane. You wrote that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know, in relation to how most companies view strategy, could you explain this perspective a little?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, because it may sound a bit, yeah, counterintuitive or whatever you call it. But I think that's one of the problems with strategy. If you look at the success rates, the failure rates, they are kind of extremely bad. And I think if you've seen stuff on LinkedIn, kind of blogs, people like to quote these kind of 50 to 70 to even 90% failure rates in strategy. Whatever the rate, the score is pretty terrible. And I think that's one of the important reasons, is that we have made strategy something exceptional, something we need to do every now and then, something that needs to be done by the people in the board or the top of the organization, something we need to do with an offsite. So somewhere else, we need to go to a hotel or a resort, have a special day, series of days where you do something serious in the morning and something fun and team building in the afternoon. So all of that is focused on making it special and thereby creating kind of fundamental disconnect between strategy and the organization, even physically, by taking it literally out of the premises, move to some other place, we make it special and disconnected from the organization. And that's what I mean with kind of ordinary, even mundane. It doesn't have to be like that. It shouldn't be like that, because strategy is just another process like any other business process. We have marketing processes, operational processes, HR processes, and so on and so forth. So why don't we have a standardized, routinized strategy process in an organization? So that's what I mean with ordinary, mundane as a strategy process.
Understood. And sometimes you need those type of, I guess you could say, ordinary processes in order for them to be, most effective.
Mm-hmm.
But, even though that might be the case, you definitely didn't do that in your book. In fact, you used a fictional character, Martine, to introduce the concept. So, kind of diving into more of the creative aspect of your book, I'm curious to know,
Mm-hmm.
why did you choose such a narrative format rather than a traditional business book approach?
Yeah, I think the most honest answer is I just wanted to try out whether I could do that, because I had written like more standard-ish business books before, like the strategy handbook and also strategy consulting, which is kind of a typical, here's how to do it, here's the steps, here's the tools, and so on. And I had read some of these short story type of business books, with the 1 Minute Manager being clearly closest to what I've done with the 1 hour strategy. And I thought, okay, it's kind of fun to do that. So it was to expand my own skills, try something new, not write yet another similar style book. That's one reason. The second reason is that, like, the strategy handbook is really like practice guide, taking you step by step by the hand and telling you exactly what to do. Whereas for the 1 hour strategy, I thought, okay, this is actually quite a radical idea. So rather than becoming very instrumental and operational, I think the first thing I need to kind of convince people of is of the idea itself. And I think an idea is much better expressed in a short, simple story than in a complicated, kind of thick guide on how to do it. So part of it is for myself, because I just wanted to find out whether I could do this. And second, because I found it a more effective form for sharing a big idea.
Understood, understood. When authors come to me and they share their, different perspectives of how to deliver information, it's great to know that, some people provide, one approach and you have another approach, and you selected the approach that works best for your strategy. And, I'm curious, for our listeners today, if you don't mind just walking us through, what exactly happens during one of these 1 hour strategy sessions? People are probably curious to know, how it could benefit them and what to expect if they were to engage in one of these. Perhaps you gave us a little bit of a sneak peek about what this might entail.
You mean if they would apply the insights from the book, what would it look like? Is that the question?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
What are some, first steps if they were to dive in and pick up the book and then implement it into their lives?
Yeah. There's kind of two sides to it. One is if you really kind of really grasp and understand the essence of the book, it's a pretty fundamental shift in how you organize. It's not even just a strategy process, it's a different way of governance because we move from kind of a top down approach where strategies develop at the core, at the top, and then trickles down to the rest of the organization to a completely participative organization wide approach. And that can only happen if your organization is ready for that. If it's ready for a transformation in the way it's governed, in the way it's led, in the way it's organized, in the way the hierarchy is organized. So that's the big, let's say, when you really want to go for it, it's a kind of fundamental change in how you organize your organization. At the other end of the extreme, you don't need to go that far. You can simply start. And I'm going to assume that this is for some sort of leader. You are leading a team, a department, or an entire organization. The good thing about the 1 hour strategy is you can do this locally, just with your team. And still, even if the rest of the organization still works very traditionally, you can apply the process, you can apply the tools in there just for your team. And even if you're not the team lead, even if you're just an individual, a professional, an employee working just for yourself, even then you can apply the insights and the steps in the book to your own job. One of the core ideas of the 1 hour strategy is that what you do and the tools you use, you do the same at every level. So you can do it individually, with a team, with a department, a division, and an entire organization. So one of these tools, what I would recommend starting with is what I've called the 6M model. It contains the 6 key ingredients of strategy in a simple template. Start filling that out for your department, for your team, for yourself, and kind of create some insights in what your current strategy looks like. Develop some insights, some takeaways, some actions, some improvements that you can make, and then revisit in a month, in a quarter, and turn this into kind of a routine process where you use this single tool, the 6M model, a couple of times per year to diagnose where you stand and to identify improvements. I think then if you do that just for yourself or just with your team, you have captured the essence of the process and the tool. And it also means, and that links to the title, the 1 hour strategy, is it means you have reserved some dedicated time to work on your strategy. So it's allocating the time, starting simple with your sphere of influence, starting simple with the 6M model, and from there on you can expand and adopt the rest of the tools and takeaways from the book.
Understood. And, thanks for sharing that with us because, now our listeners kind of understand that the gist of everything that's, going to be explained in this book. And if they want to learn a little bit more about it, they can pick it up off the shelves and, dive right in. One thing I noticed when I was going through it is that it does challenge the traditional strategy tools like SWOT analysis and extensive planning sessions. So, I'm just curious, what shortcomings did you observe from those approaches and how did that influence, the 1 hour strategy?
Yeah, I think roughly the SWOT analysis, which is kind of the most famous tool that people use, if you look in the average strategy textbook, so explaining how to do strategy, it's a large list of tools, analytical tools. It's SWOT, balanced scorecard, 5 forces model, BCG matrix, and so on and so forth. So the problem with that is it's too much focused on analysis, too little on creativity, on action, on adaptation, and so on. So that's one shortcoming with the traditional approach to strategy. The other, immediately related, it's too fragmented. It's like a collection of models, collection of frameworks. It's almost like a cafeteria where you can just pick the kind of food you would like to order and randomly put them together. But it's not a synthesized approach. It's not an integrative approach. My main two dissatisfaction initially, why I started writing the other book, the strategy handbook, in the first place. I think too analytical and too fragmented. Those are the main shortcomings that I see.
Understood, understood. So that's why the 1 hour strategy is kind of more of a practical solution that is more, I guess you could say integrated and smooth and quick. Of course, 1 hour. So
Yep.
I understand how that could be very beneficial in the modern workplace, day-to-day, usage. Based on all of this, then I guess I'd like to transition a little bit into the writing process because after all of our listeners today are not only business executives, but also aspiring authors, people who want to get their books out on the shelves. So, I'm curious to know a little bit about your writing process. Did you have any writing routines or habits that helped you complete this book? Was there any research involved as well? Was it more practical based on your experiences, or did it involve a little bit of analysis, I guess is my question.
Yes and no. Consciously no, unconsciously yes. And what I mean is that this book, and this is actually the first time I had this experience, but it kind of, other authors will sometimes tell you kind of wrote itself. And I think so since having written the strategy handbook and a few of the others since a decade, of course, my thinking, my thoughts, my vision on what strategy needed to be about and how to go about it has developed. So it keeps on developing. And I've not done systematic analysis for this, but I'm working for 20 years in this field in several roles, as you mentioned in your introduction, academia, as a consultant, as author. So it's kind of every day I work with this topic. And kind of in the back of my mind, this idea started to emerge like, hey, how can I kind of develop an approach which is kind of, in one sense, simpler, because it needs to be something that everyone can do. On the other hand, more complex because it involves an entire organization. So that's with that in the back of my mind. I think I also got inspired by some of these short story books, like the 1 Minute Manager. Yeah, and then at some point of time, you get this spark, like, hey, what if I write a similar type of book around the concept of strategy? So that's how it started, and yeah, and from there on, I just started writing. That's how it how I started this book.
Understood. Yeah, so a combination of a bunch of different things, including being inspired by others as well. So, that's great to know. And to anybody listening today, it's always great to, draw inspiration from others. For example, maybe you would use this podcast as inspiration for your own book and your own strategies. So amazing stuff right there. Now, I guess I'd like to kind of transition into, the feedback aspect of this. I'm curious to know, did you have any feedback from readers after the fact, whether it was that they were able to implement this and it inspired their own change or positive success in their own ventures? It's always something great to know, especially for listeners of our podcast, that once your book is on the shelf, you can change lives and change daily routines, all that sort of thing. So would you mind sharing a little bit about any of that feedback you might have received?
Yeah, so what happened with the book after it was published, you mean? Like, what have people done with it?
Exactly.
Feedback. I think overall feedback was extremely positive, especially for, I think, a group. I think I was tapping into a need or the similar dissatisfaction that I had with the traditional approach. So it resonated and still resonates, I think, quite well with a group of people looking for something else. They've read so many strategy books and they were looking for something else. So that's the general response. Of course, you always get also some critics, even in the process of kind of getting endorsements. And so I sent it to a few people. Majority of them were very kind and gave very positive feedback. But I also had, and I won't name them, but kind of some established professors who had written their own books who kind of responded quite aggressively. Like, there's nothing new in this book and I've done this all, and that kind of response. But that's what you can expect as well, because I think the more radical the ideas are that you share, the more offended some people will be. I think all in all, that was just a minor part, but of course, with all negative feedback, that echoes more than positive feedback. I've also, other points of feedback is people who offered to narrate an audio version of it. And I've just completed the audio version, so it will be published later in 2025. probably in a month or so from whenever we're recording this. So people seeing the value and want to kind of republish it as an audiobook, which is, by the way, a super interesting experience hearing someone else, a professional, narrating your book. It feels like, have I written this? And maybe a last response, last type of feedback is companies kind of actually telling me, okay, we're doing this now, which feels kind of a bit awkward. Like, okay, I've just mainly written this to sketch an idea, to say this is how you could do it. And that they've really taken it as a guide and, okay, this fits our philosophy, let's just do it. Yeah, so quite fascinating also how different the responses are, also how unexpected some of those are.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as any author should be, you need to be prepared for both the positive and, perhaps negative feedback. But, either way, no matter what it is, it's going to improve your skills as a writer, as a thinker, and your philosophies as well. So it's good to know that you kind of were able to experience, a little bit of both sides. But at the end of the day, you have this book out there that, so many people have benefited from, and they're still able to implement it in their own lives.
Yeah, maybe one, if I may, one other interesting thing is people that liked the book, that kind of shared it themselves on LinkedIn. I'm not so into other social media, so I don't know whether they did it there as well, but they took the initiative, like make a picture of the book and then tell others how great the book is. I think that's kind of a slightly embarrassing sometimes, but it's really very effective and very good. And maybe about the negative feedback, I think if you, and I know I personally don't like it. I feel I kind of, even like if it's a single negative feedback, I kind of tend to take it personally. I know I shouldn't, but I tend to do that. But I think it's a good sign. If you don't kind of trigger any negative response, you probably haven't said something very interesting. Because I think anything new, anything that kind of tries to move the needle will kind of have some conflict with people with kind of traditional ideas. So if you don't get that kind of response, yeah, you're probably not outspoken enough, I would think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, feedback in whatever regard is, if you spin it the right way, it could be something to develop yourself from, right? You improve from it and you use those as learning blocks, right? And you move on. So, it's great to know that, you see it in that perspective, and to anybody listening today, it's important to also receive it in a similar way as well. So, kind of transitioning forward, I'm curious to know, for any aspiring business authors out there, what kind of advice would you give them if, they're also inspired to follow in your footsteps and translate professional expertise into a book? What kind of advice and wisdom would you offer in following your footsteps?
Yeah, maybe the first advice would be something they're not looking forward to hear. I think twice. I think that's the first advice. Why I'm saying that, do you really want to write a book? I think because it's kind of trendy to do so, and especially now with generative AI, it's so easy, everyone can do it. The writing itself, it's still a craft to some extent, but yeah, with the large language models, it's becoming a commodity very quickly. So everyone can write a book, basically. So I think the core question is, why are you doing it? Is it because you think you need to do so? Is it just because you think it's nice to have and will lead to more business? Of course, that's fine, but we don't really need more books, honestly. So I'm also very selective. I could write many more books if I want, but there are already like millions of books. So what is your book going to add? So the first question is it important to you? Or do you want to commit to this? And if so, is it worth writing? Is it worth publishing? Is it worth sharing? Because if not, do something else. We don't need more noise. We don't need more information. We don't need more books. We need more interesting books. We need more high impact books, relevant books, books with a good, unique take. So that's the first thing, big advice. And then assuming you have something very interesting, important to say, if you've never written a book before, my recommendation would still don't start yet. Start with writing other stuff, blogs, posts, articles, kind of easier, smaller things. Trying to write kind of scientifically whatever that is, copying, even advice to kind of copy or mimic what others are doing. And it's, I think now, it took me quite a number of years to really find my own style. And that's what you see in the 1 Hour Strategy. It was so much fun to write. It was so easy to write because I wrote what I wanted to say in a way that I wanted to say it. And I think before you're there, it's probably good to first write quite a lot of other stuff before you start on the book. And maybe a third advice is don't take it too seriously, because then it becomes, in the end, it's just another book. 99.99% of people will never make money with it. You will just sell, you won't sell millions. Of course, the very few people who are lucky enough to do that, they're there. I think realistically, for the majority of authors, you need to do it for yourself, and not because this is going to make you super rich or change the world radically. So maybe not very kind of negative advices in a sense, but it's kind of realistic. And if all of that is kind of okay, I think then the writing process becomes fun and rewarding. And I think that's why you do it.
Thanks for offering all that to us. And, at the end of the day, you are right. It's about, being rewarding and having fun with it, and, just writing about something that you're inspired by and you believe in, and something that you just want to spread the message about. So now I'm curious to know if anybody wants to follow up and learn a little bit more and perhaps connect with you, where can they reach out? Where can they find you online? I know you mentioned LinkedIn. Is there any other avenues that they might be able to learn more?
Yeah, of course, LinkedIn is the easiest. And by the way, if you just type my name correctly in LinkedIn or in Google or wherever, you will find me. So if you spell it correctly, you end up with me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. Please do so with a message, not just connect, but with some message why you want to connect. The other way of reaching me is through our company, strategy.inc. The website also strategy.inc. That's where we have our services, the consulting and also the training services. So that's an easy way to get in touch. And in the future, maybe one kind of small sneak peek into the next, not so much a book yet, but we're building in the same idea of the 1 Hour Strategy, building a strategy competency framework, which we call the Big Five of strategy. If you look in the 1 Hour Strategy, there I kind of explain the process and the tools. But you also need the competencies. And in the very same philosophy, developed together with my co-founder, Timothy Teriyaki, we're developing a competency framework where we help people self-assess and develop the competencies you need, the strategic thinking and strategic acting competencies you need in today's fast-changing world. More info on that will be available on my LinkedIn and big5ofstrategy.com. I think now they should be able to find me.
Understood. And we'll put the links right into the description of this podcast.
Perfect.
Anybody listening today, go ahead to the descriptions, click on the links, maybe wait for the podcast to be over first, but you can check out more information there, and also stay tuned about the next release. And, as that comes to play, we'll be, more than happy to have you back on to talk a little bit more, promote it to our audience. So, I'm sure they're very interested.
Wonderful, yeah.
More about it. I'm wondering, as we start to come to the end of our podcast today, do you happen to have any last pieces of advice or pieces of wisdom to share with our audience as we begin to wrap up today?
Just find your own voice. I think that's very important. Don't copy what others are doing, maybe to start with, but then tell it the way you would say it, and not the way someone else would say it, because it's your story, it's your book, it's your writing, it's your voice.
Understood, right? Be your authentic self, speak to whatever's natural to you. I understand that completely. It's something that makes great writing even better. So thanks for sharing that with us. And again, everybody, if you're interested in learning more about the 1 Hour Strategy, we're going to have the links right in the bio. Check it out. Download the book, buy the book, and also connect on all the platforms that were just mentioned. And with that, what a fascinating discussion that we've had today about how reimagining organizations approach strategies, how it can really just benefit us in our everyday lives and our workplace environments. The key takeaway for me is that, success doesn't come from, elaborate planning training sessions or fancy frameworks. It's just from building strategic thinking into your company's culture through daily practices. So I think that's something that we can all implement our own lives with whatever endeavors you're putting into place in every day. So thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. And to everybody listening today, remember that Authors on Mission is dedicated to empowering you with knowledge and confidence needed to become an expert in your own field as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out our others, visit our website. If you're also, looking to publish your own book, Authors on Mission has an array of amazing strategies and programs that we can help you to do so, whether it's ghostwriting or editing as well. Again, check out the 1 Hour Strategy. And Jeroen, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. We look forward to hearing more about the second book. And to our listeners, until next time, keep pursuing your mission with purpose and strategy. Keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep writing. That's all for today. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great day.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.